Hari Om girls. As we are discussing the fifth module of software engineering course, the fifth module deals with software testing, and we have already discussed what do you mean by testing, why should we test the software, who is responsible for testing. We have also discussed some of the terminologies in our previous video. In this video, we are going to talk about what do you mean by a test case and test suite, what are the different types of test cases available, and the details on test cases. Let us get into the topic, test cases and test suite. So this video deals with just the terminologies related to test cases and test suite. We are not going to see various examples here. We are going to just get familiarized with what are the different terms used in the case of software testing based on test case, test suite, etc. Let us get into the topic. So when you take software testing, what we are going to observe here is how the system behaves. That is what we are going to do in the testing. So you start executing your program and you check how the system is responding, how the system is behaving. Now why we are observing is, by observing the behavior of a system or a component of a system, we are going to determine whether or not there is a failure. When you execute your program, when you execute your module, or when you execute your component, you are going to check whether any failure is there in the system or not. If there is a failure, what action is to be taken place? That is what you are going to do in the testing. Now, since you are going to observe the system behavior and you are going to find out whether any failure is available, the testing generally reveals the presence of faults and not their absence. So that is what the definition we have seen. Testing is not just understanding this program is correct. It is with the intention of finding whether any error is available in the software or not. So why we are doing it? Because we are going to observe the system behavior and we are going to determine whether any failure is available in the system. Because of this, your testing will generally reveal the presence of all the faults. We have already seen, if there is an error, it will lead you to a fault. If there is a fault, it will lead you to a failure. So when you determine there is a failure in your system, you can understand your system has some faults. Your system has some faults, maybe because of some of the errors that were made during the programming or during the requirement process or during the design phase. This is what we have to understand here. I repeat, when you are testing, you observe the system behavior. By observing the behavior, you can determine whether any failure is there or not. That is why we say testing generally reveals the presence of the faults. We have already seen an error will lead to a fault and a fault will lead to a failure. So if there is a failure, you understand there is a fault, and since there is a fault, you can easily understand there is some kind of error in your program. The error may be because of the requirement phase not done properly, or the design phase not done properly, or sometimes in the coding process itself. So by observing the failure of the system, we can deduce the presence of faults. So understand the understand the concept here clearly. Just to find out whether any error in your system, what you are doing, you observe the system and find out the failures in your system. Now, when you are going to use the testing, or when you are going to do the testing process, some of the documents we will be using in the software testing. Let us see what are the documents used. These are the three documents generally used in the testing process. You will have a test plan, you will have a scenario, you will have a test case. These are the three commonly used documents in your software testing. Now let us see what is a test oracle or a test plan. So test oracle is one of the mechanisms that checks the correctness of the program. Observe here, the correctness of the program for different test cases. That is what you are going to check. So for example, when you do the result analysis of a particular student, you are going to expect a particular output, but the system is giving you another output. So you are going to compare the expected output and the generated output will be compared. If the expected and the generated output are same, you can understand there is no error. If not, if the expected output is deviating from the generated output, then you can understand there is a failure in your system. So test oracle is just a mechanism which will be checking the correctness of the output of the program for different test cases. Now, when you want to test a particular program, the following things are required. What are they? A description about the expected behavior. That is what I said now as the expected output. So you have to describe what is the expected behavior. Fine. After that, what you need? You want a method to determine whether the observed behavior conforms to the expected behavior. So this is what I said now. To check the correctness of the program, what do you need? You need what is the expected behavior. Once you have the expected behavior, you execute your program and you are going to find out what is the observed behavior. What I said now as generated output. Generated output is what you mean by observed behavior. So you check whether the observed behavior is conforming to the expected behavior. So if both are same, there is no error. If it is not same, there is an error in your software. So this is what happens generally. You will have set of test cases, you will have the software under testing, and you will have the test oracle. Test oracle is a mechanism. What is that mechanism? Whatever output is generated by this software, and test oracle will have the set of expected output or expected behavior. Both will be given to a comparator and it will be generating the results of the testing process. So your input for the testing process will be set of test cases. Input for the software testing, test cases. Where do you input it? All the test cases will be input to the software, and all these test cases will also be available in the test oracle. Now once the software is run, and it will be generating some output. It will be generating some output here. So this output is what you call as observed behavior. This is what you call as observed behavior. Here you get the observed behavior. And this is your expected behavior. Which is the expected behavior? This one. From the test oracle, you have the expected behavior. From the software under testing, you get the observed behavior. So both observed and expected behavior will be compared, and the results of the comparison will be specified here. So this is what you call as test oracle. Now when you take a test plan, your test plan will be describing the following things. What are they? First one, it will specify the strategy that will be used to test an application. So what is the mechanism you are going to use to test an application? what strategy you are going to follow to test an application, whether you are going to test the output, whether you are going to test the behavior, whether you are going to test the user interface, whether you are going to test the database connection. So that kind of strategy you are going to specify here. So, and not only that, we will be discussing different techniques for testing. So what technique you are going to apply for testing a particular application, that is also you call as a strategy. So what is the strategy you are going to use to test an application will be described in the test plan. Then you will have the resources that will be used. So if I want to suppose, say for example, for an application I am going to test the database connectivity and the database manipulations. Now you have to specify what is the strategy you are using. Apart from that, what are the different resources you want for the testing process, that should be specified. Then when I say resources, you need the database connectivity, you need the database server to be up, and you need all the username and password, and you need a server machine for the database server, you need a separate client machine. All those kinds of resources you have to specify here. Then the third one will be the test environment. So in which the testing will be performed. So what is the environment you are going to create for performing the testing process? That should also be specified here. So when I say test environment, the platform, the network connectivity, and what do you say, like the database connectivity, all those environments you have to specify. Whether you are going to test for the end user A or end user B, you will have different end users for your software. So what environment you are going to create for the testing, that has to be specified. Then the limitations. So you will have lots of constraints in your software. What are the different constraints you are going to consider while testing the software? All the limitations, all the constraints should also be described. Then what you have to do, you need a schedule. So you have to, you will have a list of testing activities. You will have a list of test cases. So all these test cases and the testing activities must be specified. And for each test activity, you have to specify on which date and on which time you are going to do this particular activity. Or sometimes one testing activity may depend on another testing activity. So you have to prioritize what testing activity you are going to do and when you are going to do the testing activity. So typically the quality assurance team lead will be responsible for writing a test plan. So this is the person who is responsible for writing a test plan. So when you write a test plan, what are the things you have to describe? What strategy or what mechanism you are going to use for testing the application, what are the different resources that are required for testing, and what kind of environment you are going to create for the testing process, and if you have any limitations or constraints, that should also be specified, and the schedule of the testing activities. So all these things will be prepared by the team lead. Quality assurance team lead will be preparing it. Fine. Now apart from that, we are going to discuss what are the things that will be included in the test plan. So in the previous slide I said what are the things that will be described in the test plan. Fine. So that are the major content you need in the test plan. In the previous slide we discussed. Now we are going to see what are the matters that will be included in the test plan. One, you need an introduction for your test plan document. You need all the assumptions, limitations, constraints when testing the application. Whatever you are going to do, all those things must be specified. Then you need all the list of test cases. Then you need the list of features to be tested, what you are going to test, whether you are going to test the database connectivity, whether you are going to test the database manipulation, whether you are going to test the like storage, whether you are going to test the network connectivity, whether you are going to test the what do you call interfaces, user interfaces, or whether you are going to test the performance of the system, whether you are going to test the security of the system. That is what you call as features to be tested. Then what sort of approach to use when testing the software? What approach you are going to use? That is what we mentioned in the previous slide as strategy. So what strategy you are going to use, what approach you are going to use. Sometimes when you are testing, you may want to test only the output that is being generated by a function. Sometimes you want to test whether the function is executing all the statements in that particular code. So two aspects are there, right? One approach I said, whether the function is generating the correct output or not. What is another aspect? Another aspect is whether all the statements in the code is being executed. So that is what you call as approach. So now itself I mentioned two approaches. One approach was talking only about the input and output. Another approach is talking about the each and every statement in that particular function. So what sort of approach you are going to use when testing the software must be specified in your test plan. Then you need all this list of deliverables that need to be tested. So what are the different deliverables need to be tested? So when I say deliverables, we have discussed in the first module what are different deliverables. Doc manuals will be one of the deliverables. Your components will be another deliverable. Your software product is another deliverable. And if you have any interfaces, that is also another deliverable. All the operating manuals is another deliverable. Test cases is another deliverable. So like that you will have a list of deliverables. So what deliverable you are going to test now in the test plan, that should also be mentioned here. Then all the resources, as I said in the previous slide, all the resources allocated for testing the application, and all the risks involved during the testing process. Always the risk management will be there in your software development life cycle. So what is the risk you will be facing during the testing process? So when you are testing the network connectivity, what is the risk you will be facing? Or when you are testing the security, what will be the risk involved in that? Suppose say you are going to do the payment gateway testing. So when you do the payment gateway testing, you may test for crediting the data in your bank account or debiting the data from the bank account. So if this is the case, how it is to be handled, whether any risks is involved in this particular process. So that should also be mentioned here. And the schedule should also be specified. Okay, so these are the list of information you must have in the test plan. So the comprised format is the one which you have seen in the previous slide. So in the previous slide we have seen strategy, resources, test environment, limitations and schedule. So this is what is mentioned in the next slide elaborately for a test plan. Introduction, all the constraints, all the test cases, all the features, and the strategy is what you mention as approach, the deliverables, then the resources, then all the risks involved and the schedule. All these things must be there in your test plan. Fine. Okay, so now we have seen what is a test plan and what do you mean by a test oracle. Now the next question is, what do you mean by a test case? This is very, very important. And observe here, in your project work also, you will be writing lots of test cases. In your final project, you will be writing lots of test cases. And all these test cases must be represented in your project report also. So observe it carefully. What is a test case? Your test case is also known as a test, and it can be considered as a set of test inputs and execution conditions. This is what you call as a test case. Set of test inputs and execution conditions, and it also specifies the expected outcome. But what are the three things available in the test case? One is your set of test input. The other is the execution condition, and the third one will be the expected outcome. These are the three things available in your test case. Let me highlight this also. Okay, fine. Very good. So your test case can be considered as comprising a set of test case inputs, execution conditions, and expected output or outcome. So these are the three things you will have in your test case, and a group of related test cases that are generally executed together to test some specific behavior or an aspect of software under testing is often referred as a test suite. So test suite is nothing but collection of test cases that are all related test cases. That is what you call as a test suite. Okay. Now this is an example of a test case. So this is what is mentioned in our Agarwal's textbook. Test and test cases are the terms that are used interchangeably, and in practice both are same and are treated as synonyms. Test case describes an input description and an expected output description. So that is what we mentioned here in the previous line. Your test case will have inputs and outputs. Along with that you will have the conditions also. Okay. So if you see, this is an example of a test case. This is your test case template. I can call it as a test case template. And you can observe here, you will have a test case ID. And you will have a section here that mentions before execution, and this is a section after execution. So before execution this will be prepared, after execution this will be. So this is before observing and this is after observing. Now what you have to do, you have to mention what is the purpose of this particular test case, what is the precondition. For example, you want to test the database manipulation. So what is the precondition? You must connect to a database. Say you want to test whether records are being inserted properly or not, right? That is your test case. So before inserting a record to your database, what do you need? You need your software or your application to be connected to a database. So establishing a connection to the database becomes a precondition here. Fine. Then what are the inputs you are going to give? So what are the inputs you will give? You will be giving set of records for inserting into the database. What will be the expected output? Your records must be inserted into the database or it must show you some error message. Then what is the post condition? Once you have inserted your record, the database gets updated. And who is responsible for writing this particular test case? And one particular any one from the team will be representing this particular test case. Then on which date, that should also be mentioned. So once the test case is specified here, after execution you are going to specify the conditions here. What is the execution history, whether you have any errors generated, all those kind of information must be mentioned here, and the result must be mentioned here. If it fails, if the process fails, if the function fails, any possible reason, what you guess, that this is optional, because as a tester you may not understand like what may be the cause of error. If you don't understand, you need not write. Otherwise, if you have any guess for understanding, if you have any guess for the guess about the reason for the error, then that can be mentioned here. Then any other observation by the tester, that can also be mentioned here. And if you have any suggestions, the tester can suggest to the developer. The tester can suggest the possibility of error to the developer. So that can be mentioned here. then who has run to find out this particular error on which particular date. So this is a sample template, and I don't say that all the software organizations will be following the same template. This is one kind of template that can be used for a test case. So the a set of test cases is what you call as a test suite. Hence, any combination of test cases may generate a test suite. Now the next thing is, what are the things we have discussed now? What do you mean by a test oracle? What do you mean by a test plan? What do you mean by a test case? Next, the different types of test cases. What are the different types of test cases that you can generate? One, you can have a functional test case. What do you mean by functional test case? I have written a login process. Now, the statements inside the login process will be analyzed and it will be executed to test a particular condition. That is what you call as a functional. I repeat, functional is nothing but how the login process behaves when you give a username and password. So you will be having statements like establishing connection to the database, getting the username and password from the database table, and matching the username and password of the entered data to the table data, and if it matches, the the login will be successful. If it does not match, the login fails. Like that, you will have a particular function. So that function you are going to test here. Or you may be testing the negative, right? For example, username, you give an invalid username and password, and you are going to test what happens when you give a wrong username and password. Or you may be giving a error. You want to test a particular error. So that can also be mentioned here. Some kind of exceptional handling can be, right? You try giving a zero value while dividing a number. So that can be tested here. Then you will go for logical test cases. All the logic, whatever logic you have used for solving a particular function, that can be mentioned here. Logical test cases. Physical test cases, something like network connectivity, database server connectivity, that is what you call as physical test cases. And the user interface test case. You will have lots and lots of user interfaces available in your web application or in your mobile application. You want to check whether when you click a button, whether it is functioning properly. When you click a hyperlink, whether it goes to the intended web page. When you click the text box, whether it is receiving the data. When you click the radio button, whether it is taking the options properly. So functional will specify the function. The statements inside a particular function will be tested. Negative, when you give invalid input, what happens? Error, whenever you have any exceptions in your program, you want to test that particular exception. Logical test cases, sometimes in the logical test cases, for a particular function you may have more than one logic. What do? You may be testing all the logics, and whichever logic is giving you an optimum behavior, you can select that particular logic. So you call it as logical test case. Something like sorting, let us assume sorting. So what sorting is suitable for your data? That can be given as a good example for logical test case. Then you can have, so in the logical test case, what do? You will be testing the sorting process with merge sort. You test the sorting process with quick sort. Like that, you can have different logical test cases. Then physical connectivity, etc. Then the user interface. So these are the different types of test cases you can have in your software testing. Then, what are the components included in every test case? That is the next question. What are the components included in every test case? Every test case will have an ID. It will have a product module. In which particular module you are going to do this particular test. and what is the version of the product, what is the revision history, what is the purpose of the test case, what are the different assumptions for the test case, what are the preconditions, what are the different steps you are going to do, the procedure for testing, then what is the expected outcome, what is the actual outcome, what are the post conditions. So these are the different components included in the test case. You will have the ID and you specify in which particular module you are going to do this testing and what is the version of that particular software product. Any revision history is there. Suppose say you are going to write the test case for version number 2, and why you have revised it, what are the additional features in the new product, that can be mentioned here, and what is the purpose of this particular test case, what are the different assumptions, limitations, constraints in working environment, testing environment, all those things can be mentioned here. The preconditions and the post conditions can be mentioned, and the different steps involved in testing process, the expected and actual outcome. So these are the different components you will have in the test case. Now we have discussed what is a test oracle, what is a test plan, what do you mean by a test case, what are the different types of test cases, and what are the different components included in a test case. Now the next question is, how do we select our test case? You will have n number of test cases available. Will you do all these test cases, or do you go for selecting a particular test case? We use a selection criterion. If I want to select a test case, we use test selection criterion. For what? The test selection criterion specifies the conditions that must be satisfied by a set of test cases. The criterion becomes the basis for test case selection. So you are going to specify a criteria. What is the criteria? You want to test whether the database connection is proper or not. That is the criterion you can mention. Then based on that, you will list the set of test cases. Or another condition, you are going to specify, I am going to test the selection criteria, the test selection criterion. One of the criterion is I want to test whether all the user interfaces are properly functioning or not. That is the base. So for user interface testing, what are the different test cases must be included. That is how you go for selecting the test case. You will not simply go and list the test cases. Instead, you first find out the criterion, list the criterion. For each criterion, you can select the test cases. For example, this is another kind of criterion. You want to test all the statements in the program be executed at least once during the testing. So this is one criteria you are going to mention. What is the criteria? I have written a program. In the program, whether all the statements are executed at least once. Because you may be wondering, like, why I mention all the statements here. See, whenever you are having lots of branching in your program, for one execution, all the statements will not be executed. Suppose say if you have a condition like if A greater than B is a condition, and you will have a true case and you will have a false case. When you execute a program for once, you will be executing either a true case or a not case, false case. Both will not be executed in one execution. So that means what? The statements in the true block or the statements in the false block might be missed out or skipped because of the condition. So this is what you have to understand. So what is your criteria now? All the statements in the program must be executed at least once. So what I do now? I have to write two test cases. What are the two test cases? One for A greater than B, another one for A less than or equal to B, so that both the true state block as well as the false block will be executed at least once in my test cases. So that is what you call as a criterion. Then once you have decided this is what my criteria, you will be writing the set of test cases and that satisfies this criterion for program P. If the execution of P with T ensures that each statement in P is executed at least once. That is what you are going to do. So set of test cases T will be written. What is this test case must be satisfied. How it satisfies the criteria for a program P. When it satisfies, if the execution of P with T ensures that each statement in P is executed at least once. This is how we select the test cases. Now when you do the testing process using these set of test cases, there are two fundamental properties for this testing criterion. One is reliability, the other one is validity. So the criterion is reliable if all the sets that satisfy the criterion detect the same error, then you call it as reliable. And it is valid if for any error in the program there is some set satisfying the criterion that will reveal the error. So when you say your criterion will be reliable and your criterion must be valid. When will you say your criterion is reliable? If all the test cases that are satisfying the criterion detect the same error, then you call it as a reliable. So when you write test case for A greater than B, when you write a test case for A less than or equal to B, both test cases are giving you the same error, then you say the criterion is a reliable criterion. When you say your criterion is valid, if for any error in the program there is some set satisfying the criterion that will reveal the error. If the criterion test cases reveal that particular error, then you say the criterion is a valid criterion. So that is how you are going to design the selection criteria. Now when you take the testing can be done manually or you can do the automate testing also. So when you do the testing, the tester will be executing. Tester is a human being. The tester executing the test cases in the test suite and then checking if the behavior is as specified in the test case. And this is going to be a very, very cumbersome process because your test suite will contain a large number of test cases. So human being manually doing thousands and 2000 lines of codes will not be possible. It's going to be hectic. It becomes even more cumbersome since the test suite often has to be executed every time the software and the test is changed. So manual testing is not a recommended process, but the current trend is you go for automate testing. So you have lots of testing frameworks existing now, and these testing framework is also sometimes called as test harness, and this is the one that provides easy means of defining a test suite, executing it and reporting the results, right? So this is what you have to understand about what do you mean by test cases and test suite. Along with we have also seen what is a test plan and test oracle, right? So in the next video we will be talking about what are the different levels of testing. Okay, see you in the next video. Thank you.